My daughter-in-law thought I was just another elderly woman living off family charity, someone she could dismiss with cruel words and condescending smiles. She called me completely worthless right there at the dinner table, as if my 72 years on this earth meant nothing. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I simply excused myself from the table, walked to my purse, and pulled out a single piece of paper. When I placed my bank statement in front of her, the color drained from her face so quickly I thought she might faint. 7 figures. That's what she saw. 7 figures that I had earned, saved, and invested over 5 decades of hard work she knew absolutely nothing about. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Maria Elena Brown, and at 72 years old, I've learned that people see what they expect to see, not what's actually there. I suppose that's how I ended up living in my son's house in Charlotte, North Carolina, being treated like a charity case by a woman who didn't know the first thing about my life before she entered it. I wasn't always the quiet grandmother sitting in the corner of family gatherings. For 43 years, I was Maria Elena Vasquez. Yes, I kept my maiden name professionally, one of the most successful commercial real estate brokers in the Research Triangle area. I started in 1978 when women in real estate were expected to sell suburban homes to other women, while the men handled the serious commercial deals. I had other plans. My first office was a converted storage room above a diner in Raleigh. The rent was $35 a month, which was still a stretch on my secretary's salary, but I knew I wasn't going to build anything working for someone else. I had exactly $412 in my savings account, a used Buick with over 100,000 miles on it, and a determination that my infant son would never see his mother settle for less than she was worth. The early years were brutal. I spent mornings cold calling businesses, afternoons showing properties that owners often didn't think a young Hispanic woman could possibly understand, and evenings studying zoning laws, tax codes, and market analyses by lamplight after my son was asleep. I learned quickly that in commercial real estate, knowledge wasn't just power, it was currency. The more I knew about a property, a neighborhood, a development trend, the more respect I commanded, regardless of what people thought about my accent or my age. My first major sale came in 1981. A textile company was looking to relocate their manufacturing facility, and 3 male brokers had already tried and failed to find them suitable space. The problem wasn't the available properties. It was that none of the brokers had bothered to understand the company's actual needs. They were showing them generic warehouse spaces when what the company really needed was a facility with specific electrical requirements, loading dock configurations, and proximity to both the interstate and a rail line. I spent 2 weeks researching every industrial property within a 50-mile radius of their preferred location. I studied traffic patterns, freight costs, utility rates, and local tax incentives. When I finally presented my proposal, it wasn't just for a building, it was for a comprehensive solution that would save them nearly $30,000 annually in operational costs. The commission from that sale was more money than I had ever seen at one time. Instead of celebrating, I invested every penny back into my business. Better office space, a newer car, professional photography for my property listings, and most importantly, continuing education. I enrolled in every real estate course I could find, attended conferences in other states, and networked relentlessly with developers, contractors, and city planners. By 1985, I was no longer the young woman fighting for scraps. I had become Maria Elena Vasquez, the broker you called when you needed someone who could see around corners, anticipate problems, and find solutions that others missed. My client list included major corporations relocating to North Carolina, developers planning shopping centers and office complexes, and local businesses expanding their operations. But success in commercial real estate isn't just about individual sales. It's about understanding long-term market trends and positioning yourself accordingly. In the late 1980s, I started noticing patterns in the development requests coming through the city planning offices. Technology companies were beginning to look seriously at North Carolina, drawn by the research universities, lower costs, and business-friendly environment. While other brokers were focused on traditional manufacturing and retail clients, I began specializing in technology sector relocations. I studied everything I could about the industry, their space requirements, their growth patterns, their decision-making processes. I learned the language of server rooms and fiber optic infrastructure, clean rooms, and climate control systems. When the technology boom hit North Carolina in the 1990s, I was ready. I had already identified the prime locations, understood the zoning requirements, and built relationships with the contractors who could handle specialized build-outs. Companies that other brokers couldn't even get meetings with were calling me directly. The commissions were substantial, but more importantly, I was building something bigger than individual transactions. I was creating a reputation as the broker who understood the future of North Carolina's economy before it happened. Property developers started coming to me not just to sell their existing spaces, but to get my opinion on where to build next. Now, I never forgot where I came from, though. Every success reminded me of those early mornings in that storage room office, wondering if I could make the rent. I remembered every client who initially doubted my capabilities, every deal that almost fell through, every night I stayed up late preparing proposals while my son did homework at the kitchen table. My son, David, grew up watching me work. He saw the phone calls, the late nights, the weekend property tours. He understood that success wasn't handed to anyone. It was earned through preparation, persistence, and professional excellence. When he graduated from college and started his own career in marketing, I was proud not just of his achievements, but of the work ethic he had learned by watching mine. I met Richard Brown in 1995 at a Chamber of Commerce event. He was a widowed professor of economics at UNC Chapel Hill, intelligent and kind, with grown children of his own. Our courtship was quiet and mature. Two people who had built independent lives and found they enjoyed sharing them. When we married in 1997, I was 55 years old and at the peak of my career. It wasn't a fairy tale romance. It was better. It was a partnership between equals. Richard understood my work in ways my first husband never had. He appreciated the intellectual challenges of commercial real estate, the economic analysis, the strategic thinking. He often said I could have been a successful economist myself, but I knew my talents lay in the practical application of economic principles, not the theoretical study of them. Together, we built a comfortable life. Richard's professor salary was modest but steady, while my real estate income fluctuated dramatically depending on market conditions and major deals. We learned to live primarily on his income and invest mine, a strategy that served us well through economic downturns and market volatility. By the time I retired in 2021, at the age of 70, my portfolio included commercial properties I had purchased as investments, stocks I had bought with commission bonuses, and savings accounts that had grown steadily through decades of careful financial management. I wasn't wealthy by billionaire standards, but I was secure in ways that most people never achieve. Richard passed away suddenly in early 2023, a heart attack that left me not just grieving but facing practical decisions about my future. The house we had shared in Chapel Hill felt too large, too quiet, too full of memories that made the silence unbearable. When my son David suggested I move in with him and his family in Charlotte, it seemed like a reasonable transition. A way to be close to my grandchildren, to help where I could, to belong somewhere during this difficult time. It seemed like I should have known better. I should have recognized the warning signs in the way David's wife, Jennifer, phrased the invitation. She spoke about how nice it would be for the children to have their grandmother around, how I could help with babysitting, how it would save everyone money on childcare costs. She never once mentioned what I might want or need during this period of adjustment. But grief makes you vulnerable in ways you don't expect. I missed the subtle implications, the assumptions, the way I was being positioned as a solution to their needs rather than a person deserving respect and consideration. I sold my Chapel Hill house, donated most of my furniture to charity, and moved my remaining belongings into the guest bedroom of their suburban Charlotte home. It was a mistake I would soon understand completely. Because Jennifer Patterson Brown looked at me and saw exactly what she expected to see: an elderly widow who needed their charity, someone who should be grateful for their generosity, a burden they were graciously accepting out of family obligation. She had no idea who I really was, and for the first few months I let her keep believing her assumptions. I told myself it was easier, less complicated, more peaceful to let her think what she wanted to think. But assumptions have a way of becoming actions. And actions, eventually, have consequences. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The Patterson-Brown household operated like a well-oiled machine, and I quickly learned that my role was to be a silent component, useful when needed, invisible when not. Jennifer had systems for everything: color-coded calendars on the refrigerator, labeled storage containers in every closet, even a schedule posted by the coffee maker outlining who was responsible for what household tasks on which days. My name appeared nowhere on these lists. David left for his marketing firm downtown every morning at 7:30 sharp, travel mug in hand, already scrolling through emails on his phone. The children, Emma and Lucas, ages 8 and 10, followed their own routines with military precision. Backpacks packed the night before, lunchboxes prepared according to Jennifer's nutritional guidelines, after-school activities mapped out weeks in advance. Jennifer managed it all with the efficiency of someone who had turned family life into a professional project. She worked from home as a freelance graphic designer, which meant she was always present, always watching, always ready to point out when something didn't align with her vision of how things should run. At first, I tried to find my place within her system. I offered to help with the morning routine, suggesting I could prepare the children's breakfast while she focused on getting herself ready. Jennifer smiled, that tight, controlled smile I would come to know well, and explained that the children had very specific dietary requirements and breakfast timing that worked with their schedule. She didn't need help, but thank you for offering. I suggested I could handle some of the household shopping, mentioning that I had plenty of time and knew the area well from my years working in Charlotte real estate. Again, the smile. Jennifer had very particular brands she preferred, specific stores she trusted, and a budget system that required her personal oversight. But thank you for thinking of it. When I offered to pick up the children from school on days when her client meetings ran late, Jennifer explained that the kids were enrolled in after-school programs specifically designed to prevent scheduling conflicts. Their time was already maximized for educational and social development. She had it handled. The message was clear. Your help is not needed because you don't understand how we do things here. But what struck me most was how she spoke to me during these conversations. Her tone carried the patient condescension, typically reserved for elderly relatives who meant well, but couldn't quite grasp modern parenting. She spoke slowly, as if my age had automatically diminished my comprehension. She repeated important details, as if I might forget them. She explained basic concepts, as if my decades of managing complex business transactions had somehow evaporated with my husband's death. I had encountered this attitude before, of course. In real estate, I had dealt with clients who initially underestimated me based on my gender, my accent, or my appearance. But those situations were professional. I could prove my competence through results, change perceptions through performance. This was different. This was personal, and the stakes were my daily existence in what was supposed to be my home. The children, bless them, were naturally more accepting. Emma would curl up beside me on the couch while I read, asking questions about the books and stories from my childhood. Lucas brought me his math homework when he got stuck, somehow sensing that I might have insights his parents missed. During these moments, I felt useful, valued, connected to something meaningful. But Jennifer always found ways to interrupt these interactions. She would appear with snacks the children needed to eat, or announce that homework time was over and it was time for their scheduled screen time, or suddenly remember that they had chores to complete before dinner. Never rude, never obvious, but always effective at breaking the connection between the children and me. I began to understand that Jennifer saw my relationship with Emma and Lucas as competition rather than complement. In her carefully orchestrated family dynamic, she was the central figure, the one who provided guidance, solved problems, and received the children's gratitude and affection. My presence, especially any meaningful interaction with the children, disrupted that narrative. The house itself became a subtle battleground. Jennifer had decorated it in the modern farmhouse style that was popular in their neighborhood. White walls, gray furniture, carefully curated accessories that suggested comfort without actually providing it. Everything had its designated place, and that place was never where I naturally wanted to put things. I learned not to leave my reading glasses on the kitchen counter because Jennifer would move them to a more appropriate location, usually my bedroom, which meant I had to go upstairs every time I wanted to read the newspaper. I learned not to adjust the thermostat because Jennifer had programmed it to maintain optimal energy efficiency, and my comfort preferences weren't part of the calculation. I learned not to use the good towels in the guest bathroom because those were for actual guests, not permanent residents. I learned not to park in the driveway spot closest to the front door because that was David's space, even when he was traveling for work and wouldn't be home for days. Each of these corrections came with an explanation that sounded reasonable in isolation. The glasses needed to be in my room so they wouldn't get mixed up with anyone else's. The thermostat was programmed to save money on utility bills. The towels were kept nice for when they had company. The parking spot maintained order in their system. But collectively, these small restrictions created a clear message. This is not your home, these are not your decisions to make, and your preferences will always be secondary to the established order. The most painful part was watching David navigate these dynamics. He wasn't cruel or deliberately dismissive, but he had learned to defer to Jennifer's management style in all domestic matters. When I mentioned that the guest room got quite cold at night, he would nod sympathetically and then suggest I might want to ask Jennifer about adjusting the thermostat since she handled those things. When I offered to contribute to the grocery budget, a reasonable suggestion since I was eating their food and had my own income, David said it was a nice gesture but that Jennifer managed all the household finances and he didn't want to mess up her system. When I suggested we might eat dinner together as a family more often, since I noticed they often ate at different times in different rooms, David agreed it was a good idea but said Jennifer would need to work it into the children's activity schedule. Everything went through Jennifer. Every decision, every suggestion, every attempt at participation in family life had to be filtered through her approval and integrated into her systems. I wasn't consulted about these systems. I wasn't asked what might work for me. I was simply expected to adapt to whatever Jennifer had determined was optimal for her family. The breaking point came during my 3rd month in the house. I had been quietly observing their financial struggles. Not snooping, but it's impossible to live in a house without noticing tension around money. I heard Jennifer on phone calls with credit card companies, requesting payment extensions. I saw David working late into the night on freelance projects to supplement his salary. I noticed they had canceled their family vacation, telling the children it was because work schedules were too busy, not because they couldn't afford it. Kwatarak, mashaif. I wanted to help. Not by interfering or taking over, but by contributing in a way that could ease some of their stress. I had income from my investment properties, substantial savings, and no major expenses of my own. It seemed natural to offer assistance to family members who were struggling. I chose my moment carefully, waiting for an evening when David was home and the children were in bed. I sat down with both of them at the kitchen table and gently suggested that I might be able to help with some household expenses. Not as charity, but as a fair contribution from someone who was living in their home and benefiting from their hospitality. David started to respond positively. I could see the relief in his eyes, but Jennifer cut him off quickly. "That's very generous," she said with that same controlled smile. "But we have everything under control. We don't need financial help from family members." The emphasis on family members was subtle but unmistakable. I wasn't being declined as a potential contributor to the household. I was being reminded of my place as a dependent relative whose offer of help was inappropriate because it suggested they were unable to manage their own affairs. "I just thought," I began. "Really, Maria, we appreciate the thought, but David and I prefer to handle our own responsibilities. It's important for us to maintain our independence." Independence. As if accepting help from me would somehow compromise their autonomy, while my dependence on their charity was perfectly acceptable. That night, I lay in the guest bed listening to muffled voices from their bedroom. I couldn't make out the words, but I could hear the tone. Jennifer's voice sharp with frustration, David's responses shorter and more defensive. I knew they were arguing about money, about my offer, about the tension that was building in their carefully controlled household. And I realized that Jennifer didn't just want me to be quiet and out of the way. She wanted me to be powerless. My offer to contribute financially had threatened something fundamental in her understanding of our relationship. In her mind, I was supposed to be the grateful recipient of their generosity, not someone with resources of my own to offer. That was when I understood that no amount of adaptation on my part would change the dynamic Jennifer had established. She had cast me in the role of elderly dependent, and she intended to keep me there regardless of who I actually was or what I might have to contribute. It was time to stop playing the part she had written for me. The transformation was gradual, so subtle that I might have missed it if I hadn't spent decades reading between the lines in business negotiations. Jennifer didn't suddenly become hostile or overtly rude. Instead, she began a carefully orchestrated campaign to make me disappear in plain sight. It started with the family photos. The refrigerator had always been covered with pictures, school events, family outings, holiday celebrations. I noticed that new photos began appearing regularly, but they followed a specific pattern. Every image featured David, Jennifer, and the children in various combinations, but never included me. Even photos from events I had attended were cropped or angled to exclude my presence. There was a particularly telling example from Lucas's soccer game the previous weekend. I had been there, cheering from the sidelines, and Jennifer had taken several photos of the family celebrating his goal. The version that appeared on the refrigerator showed David lifting Lucas in triumph, with Emma clapping beside them. I had been standing right next to Emma in the original shot, but the photo was cropped to show only the quote, family unit. When I mentioned this to David, he seemed genuinely surprised and said he hadn't noticed. Jennifer, overhearing the conversation, explained that she had cropped the photo to fit the magnetic frame better and hadn't really thought about it. Her tone suggested I was being overly sensitive about something completely innocent. But there was nothing innocent about the pattern that emerged over the following weeks. Family group texts went out about weekend plans, but somehow my number was never included. Dinner reservations were made for 4 people when 5 lived in the house. When neighbors asked about me at block parties, Jennifer would smile and say I was resting or not feeling social today, even when I was perfectly capable of speaking for myself. The children began to mirror these behaviors without realizing it. When Emma drew pictures of my family for school projects, the stick figures included Mommy, Daddy, and Lucas, but not Grandma Maria. When Lucas told his friends about their weekend camping trip, he described it as something my family had done, using language that naturally excluded me even though I had been there. I understood what was happening. Jennifer was systematically editing me out of their family narrative, creating a version of their life where I existed as a temporary resident rather than a family member. She was teaching the children, through her own example, to see me as peripheral to their real family story. The most painful part was how effective this strategy was becoming. Even I began to internalize the message. I started hesitating before joining conversations, wondering if my input was welcome. I began declining invitations to family activities, telling myself I probably wasn't really needed anyway. I found myself making smaller and smaller claims on shared spaces, retreating more and more into the guest bedroom that had become my entire world. Jennifer's social media presence told the story she wanted to tell. Her Instagram account was filled with beautifully curated images of family life. David cooking breakfast on Sunday mornings, the children building blanket forts in the living room, cozy family movie nights with popcorn and pajamas. The captions spoke of gratitude for her beautiful family and her blessed life. I appeared in none of these images, despite being present for most of these moments. When friends commented asking about David's mother, Jennifer would respond that I was doing well and adjusting to retirement, as if I were a distant relative they occasionally checked on, rather than someone living in their home. The neighbors began to treat me differently too. At first, they had been warm and welcoming, introducing themselves and asking about my transition to Charlotte. But as Jennifer's version of the family story took hold, Their interactions with me became more distant, more polite, more temporary. They spoke to me the way people speak to visiting relatives, friendly but not invested, cordial but not connected. Mrs. Henderson from next door stopped asking if I wanted to join her morning walks. The Johnsons across the street no longer invited me to their backyard barbecues. When I asked Jennifer about it, she suggested that perhaps they were just being respectful of my need for privacy during this difficult adjustment period. She made it sound like she was protecting me from unwanted social obligations. But I knew what was really happening. Jennifer had been managing the narrative about me in ways I couldn't see, presenting me as someone fragile, temporary, or simply not part of their permanent social circle. She was skilled at this kind of social engineering, creating impressions without saying anything directly false, steering conversations without seeming manipulative. The household routines reinforced this invisible status. Dinner times became increasingly fluid, with family members eating at different times based on their schedules. This meant fewer opportunities for family conversation and fewer occasions when my absence would be noticeable. Jennifer would often feed the children early, citing their homework schedules or bedtime routines, which meant that by the time David and I were available to eat together, it felt awkward to insist on a formal family meal. Jennifer's work schedule became more demanding, or at least she presented it that way. She was always on important client calls during times when family activities might naturally occur. She had urgent deadlines that required her full attention during potential conversation moments. She was managing crisis situations that made any family discussion seem trivial and inconsiderate. I began to suspect that some of these work emergencies were fabricated or exaggerated. The timing was too convenient, the urgency too consistent with moments when family bonding might otherwise occur. But there was no way to challenge this without seeming paranoid or accusatory. The financial tensions in the house were becoming more obvious, despite Jennifer's attempts to maintain the appearance of control. I noticed they had switched to generic brands for most groceries. David was taking on more freelance projects, working late into the night on his laptop at the kitchen table. Jennifer was declining invitations to events that required spending money, always with plausible excuses about scheduling conflicts or the children's needs. I wanted desperately to help, but my previous offer had been so firmly rejected that I didn't know how to raise the subject again. I considered speaking to David privately, but I knew that any conversation about money would eventually involve Jennifer, and she had made her position clear. Instead, I began contributing in ways that couldn't be refused or reframed. I started buying groceries during my walks to the store, claiming I needed the exercise and had picked up a few things while I was out. I filled the gas tank when I borrowed David's car for errands, saying it was the courteous thing to do. I left cash on the counter after using the landline for long-distance calls, explaining that I wanted to cover the charges. These contributions were small enough that rejecting them would seem petty, but significant enough to provide real relief. Jennifer couldn't refuse them without appearing ungracious, but she couldn't acknowledge them without admitting that help was needed. I watched her struggle with this dynamic. She wanted to maintain her narrative of independence and control, but she also couldn't afford to refuse practical assistance. So she accepted my contributions while minimizing their importance, treating them as insignificant gestures rather than meaningful help. "Oh, you didn't need to do that," she would say when she found money I had left for utilities. "But thank you, I guess." The phrase "I guess" became her standard response to my attempts to contribute. It suggested that my help was unnecessary and perhaps even slightly inappropriate, but she was gracious enough to accept it anyway. This pattern continued for weeks. I would find small ways to help, and Jennifer would accept while making it clear that the help wasn't really needed. It was a delicate dance of pride and practicality, with both of us pretending not to notice the financial stress that was growing more obvious each day. But I was keeping track. Every grocery receipt, every gas fill-up, every utility contribution, not to keep score or to use as leverage, but because I wanted to understand the full scope of their financial challenges. My business background had taught me that you can't solve problems you don't fully understand. What I discovered was that their money troubles were more serious than they were admitting, even to themselves. The mortgage was manageable, but barely. Credit card debt was accumulating faster than they could pay it down. David's salary covered basic expenses, but there was no cushion for emergencies or unexpected costs. And they were trying to maintain a lifestyle that required more income than they actually had. The children's activities, the house payments, the car loans, the insurance costs, it all added up to a budget that worked on paper but had no room for error in reality. I understood why Jennifer was so resistant to accepting help. Admitting they needed financial assistance would mean acknowledging that her careful management and planning weren't sufficient. It would mean accepting that the independence she valued so highly was actually an illusion. But understanding her position didn't make living with its consequences any easier. I was still being systematically erased from family life, still being treated as a temporary burden rather than a permanent family member, still being made to feel like my presence was tolerated rather than welcomed. Something had to change. And I was beginning to realize that the change would have to come from me. Ikolaha ba 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 ba. The dinner table conversation that changed everything happened on a rainy Tuesday evening in October. David had come home late from a client presentation that hadn't gone well. I could tell from the way he dropped his briefcase a little too heavily and rubbed his temples before even greeting anyone. Jennifer was stressed about a graphic design project that kept expanding in scope while the client resisted paying additional fees. The children were cranky from being cooped up inside all day due to the weather. I had spent the afternoon making arroz con pollo, my grandmother's recipe that had always been David's favorite when he was growing up. I thought a comforting meal might help lift everyone's spirits. I set the table for 5, lit a candle, and waited for the family to gather. Jennifer appeared first, still wearing her headset from a client call that had apparently just ended. She glanced at the table setting with surprise, as if she had forgotten that dinner time existed. "Oh," she said, checking her phone. "I didn't realize you were cooking. I already ordered pizza for the kids. It should be here any minute." David came downstairs looking exhausted. He saw the table I had prepared and smiled, the first genuine smile I had seen from him in weeks. "Mom, this smells incredible. I haven't had your arroz con pollo in years." "I already ordered food," Jennifer repeated, her voice carrying a slight edge. "The children are expecting pizza and I don't want to mess up their routine." "Can't we have both?" David suggested, clearly trying to navigate between his appreciation for my effort and his wife's established plans. "Maybe save the pizza for lunch tomorrow?" Jennifer's phone buzzed with a delivery notification. "It's already paid for and it's here. Emma, Lucas, come eat." The children bounded down the stairs, excited about pizza night. When they saw my carefully prepared meal, Emma asked if they could have some of Grandma Maria's rice too. Lucas nodded enthusiastically, saying it smelled really good. "You can have a small taste after you finish your pizza," Jennifer said firmly. "But let's not fill up on heavy food when we already have dinner planned." Heavy food. As if my grandmother's recipe, the meal I had spent 3 hours preparing with love and care, was somehow inferior to processed pizza from a chain restaurant. I served myself a portion and sat down, trying to keep my expression neutral. David joined me, praising the flavors and asking about the recipe. The children ate their pizza quickly, eager to try my cooking, while Jennifer picked at a single slice and scrolled through her phone. That's when Lucas, innocent and curious as children are, asked the question that shattered the careful pretense we had all been maintaining. "Grandma Maria, why don't you eat dinner with us very much anymore? You used to when you first moved here." The silence that followed was deafening. David stopped chewing. Jennifer looked up from her phone. Even Emma seemed to sense that something significant had just been said. "Grandma Maria eats with us," Jennifer replied carefully. "She just has different preferences about timing and food choices." But Lucas, with the persistence of a 10-year-old who sensed something wasn't quite right, continued. "But before, we all ate together, and now it's usually just us 4. Did we do something wrong?" "Of course not, sweetie," David said quickly. "Everyone just has different schedules now." "But Grandma Maria doesn't have a schedule," Emma chimed in, with the brutal honesty of an 8-year-old. "She's retired." "Mom, you always say retired people have lots of free time." Jennifer's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Grandma Maria chooses how she wants to spend her time," she said. "Just like we all do." The word chooses hung in the air like an accusation. as if my increasing isolation from family activities was a personal preference rather than the result of months of subtle exclusion. I looked around the table at these 4 people who were supposed to be my family. David, my son, who had inherited my work ethic but seemed to have lost the ability to stand up for what he believed was right when it conflicted with domestic peace. Jennifer, who had perfected the art of rewriting reality to suit her preferred narrative. Emma and Lucas, innocent children who were beginning to notice the cracks in the adult world around them. Something inside me shifted. Not anger exactly, but a crystallization of clarity that had been building for months. "You're right, Emma," I said quietly. "I am retired. I do have free time, and I have been choosing to spend more time alone lately." Jennifer relaxed slightly, thinking I was agreeing with her version of events. "But," I continued, my voice growing stronger, "sometimes people choose to be alone because they don't feel welcome in the places where they used to belong." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. David looked confused. Jennifer's face went carefully blank. The children sensed tension they didn't understand. "Maria," Jennifer said, using the tone she typically reserved for correcting the children's behavior, "I think you might be misunderstanding." "Am I?" I interrupted, which was so unlike my usual behavior that everyone at the table went completely still. "Emma, when you draw pictures of your family for school, who do you include?" Emma glanced nervously at her mother before answering. Mommy and Daddy and Lucas." "And Lucas, when your friends come over, how do you introduce me?" Lucas shifted uncomfortably. I don't know, you're usually in your room when my friends are here." "That's because Grandma Maria likes her privacy," Jennifer said quickly. "No," I said, standing up slowly. "That's because I've learned not to interrupt when I'm not part of the plan." David finally found his voice. "Mom, what are you talking about? You're always welcome." "Am I, David? When was the last time you asked my opinion about anything? When was the last time anyone in this family asked what I might want to do on a weekend? When was the last time I was included in a decision that affects all of us?" The questions hung in the air like challenges. David opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, apparently unable to think of recent examples. Jennifer, however, was ready with an answer. "Maria, we've all been very respectful of your need to adjust to living here. We haven't wanted to pressure you or make demands." "Respectful," I repeated, tasting the word like something bitter. "Is that what we're calling it?" "I think," Jennifer said, her voice taking on a sharper edge, "that everyone is a little emotional right now. Maybe we should discuss this when we're all calmer." "I am calm," I said, "probably calmer than I've been in months, because I'm finally saying what I should have said a long time ago." The children were watching this exchange with wide eyes, sensing they were witnessing something important, but not understanding what it meant. "Emma, Lucas," Jennifer said, "why don't you go upstairs and get ready for baths? The grown-ups need to have a conversation." But I held up my hand before the children could move. "No, they should hear this, because it affects them too." Jennifer's control finally cracked slightly. "Maria, this is not appropriate." "What's not appropriate," I said, my voice growing stronger with each word, "is pretending that someone doesn't exist while they're sitting right in front of you. What's not appropriate is teaching children that family members are disposable when they become inconvenient. That's not," David started. "What's not appropriate," I continued, looking directly at Jennifer, "is treating someone like a burden while accepting their money to pay your bills." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the rain outside seemed to have stopped. Jennifer's face went white, then red, then white again. "I don't know what you're implying," she said carefully. "I'm not implying anything," I replied. "I'm stating facts. The grocery money I leave on the counter, the gas I put in David's car, the utility payments I've been making for months, the cash I leave to cover long-distance calls I never actually make." David looked genuinely shocked. "Mom, she's been helping us," Jennifer said quickly, "which we've appreciated, but it's not like we asked." "No," I agreed. "You didn't ask, you just took, while making me feel like my presence here was charity you were providing, rather than family support that goes both ways." Jennifer stood up abruptly. "I think this conversation has gone far enough. You're obviously upset about something, but attacking our parenting and our gratitude isn't." "Gratitude?" I laughed, a sound with no humor in it. Jennifer, you want to know what would show gratitude? Treating me like a person instead of a problem. Including me in your lives instead of editing me out. Acknowledging that I might have something valuable to contribute beyond money you pretend you don't need. We never said, Jennifer began. You never said a lot of things, I interrupted. But you've made your feelings perfectly clear in every other way possible. The children were still sitting frozen at the table, pizza forgotten, watching the first real argument they had ever witnessed in their home. And you know what the really sad part is? I continued, looking around the table. I could have helped you. Really helped you. Not just with grocery money and gas, but with the financial problems you're pretending don't exist. I could have helped you plan for the children's future, invest in their education, maybe even help David start that consulting business he's been dreaming about but can't afford to pursue. David's eyes widened. How did you know about? I know a lot of things, I said, including how much someone is worth when they're constantly being told they're completely worthless. The last words came out with more force than I had intended. The mask was finally off, the truth was finally spoken, and there was no going back to pretending anymore. Jennifer sat back down heavily, as if the fight had suddenly gone out of her. David looked between his mother and his wife with an expression of dawning understanding. The children remained motionless, sensing that something fundamental had just shifted in their world. I remained standing, looking at each of them in turn, waiting to see who would speak next and what they would choose to say. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds. I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen, the old house settling around us, Emma's nervous breathing beside me. Nobody seemed to know how to respond to what I had just said. Finally, Jennifer found her voice, though it came out smaller than usual. Maria, I think you're being unfair. We've never made you feel completely worthless, I finished for her. Actually, Jennifer, those were your exact words. Not today, but 3 weeks ago when you were on the phone with your sister Rebecca. You thought I was outside in the garden, but I was just around the corner in the laundry room. Jennifer's face went pale. That was taken out of context. I was frustrated about something else entirely. Were you? I asked. Because from what I heard, you were explaining to Rebecca why you didn't think I should be involved in planning Emma's birthday party. Something about how I was completely worthless when it came to understanding what modern kids actually want, and how it would be easier to just handle everything yourself rather than hurt my feelings by telling me my ideas were outdated. Emma looked stricken. Mom, you said that about Grandma Maria? Jennifer's mouth opened and closed several times before she managed to speak. Emma, sweetheart, grown-ups sometimes say things when they're stressed that don't come out the right way. But did you say it? Lucas asked with the directness that only children possess. Matt, Rao. David was staring at his wife with an expression I couldn't quite read. Disappointment, maybe. Or recognition of something he had been trying not to see. Jennifer, he said quietly, did you really say that? David, you know how Rebecca is. She was pushing me about why I wasn't asking for more help with party planning, and I was just explaining that different generations have different ideas about what. Did you say those words? David repeated, his voice firmer now. Jennifer looked around the table, seeming to realize that her usual techniques for managing the narrative weren't working. I may have used those words, but the context was completely different than how it sounds now. What context makes calling someone completely worthless sound different? I asked. For the first time since I had known her, Jennifer had no ready answer. She sat there, trapped by her own words, unable to explain them away. And, you know what the funny thing is? I continued, reaching into my purse that was hanging on the back of my chair. While you were telling your sister how worthless I am, I was actually in the laundry room looking at this. I pulled out a folded piece of paper and placed it on the table. It was a bank statement, not mine, but one that had been left on top of the washing machine, apparently forgotten after Jennifer had been doing laundry earlier that week. I wasn't snooping, I said. It was just sitting there, and I couldn't help but notice the balance. $437. With 3 more automatic payments scheduled before David's next paycheck. David's face went from confusion to embarrassment to something that might have been panic. Mom, that's not, we have other accounts. Do you? I asked gently. Because I've been living here for 4 months, David. I've watched you work until midnight on freelance projects. I've seen Jennifer decline every invitation that costs money. I've noticed that Emma's art classes stopped and Lucas's soccer cleats haven't been replaced even though they're too small. The children looked at their parents with new understanding. Children are more observant than adults give them credit for, and I could see recognition dawning in their eyes. We're managing fine, Jennifer said, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. Are you? I asked. Because managing fine doesn't usually involve borrowing money from credit cards to pay the mortgage, which is what that payment reversal fee suggests happened last month. Jennifer's hands were shaking slightly now. You have no right to look at our private financial information. You're absolutely right, I agreed. I don't. But I also don't have the right to watch my family struggle while I sit on resources that could help, simply because you're too proud to admit you need assistance. We don't need, Jennifer started. Jennifer, David interrupted, and there was something new in his voice. Authority, maybe, or just exhaustion with the pretense. Stop. Just stop. He turned to look at me. Mom, what are you saying exactly? I reached into my purse again and pulled out a second piece of paper. This one was from my own bank. My primary checking account statement that I had printed out that morning after checking my balance online. I'm saying, I replied, placing the statement face down on the table, that while Jennifer was calling me completely worthless, the worthless old woman she was complaining about was looking at her own financial situation and trying to figure out how to help her family without damaging anyone's pride. I paused, looking around the table at each of them. I'm saying that the person you've been treating like a burden for the past 4 months has been trying to figure out how to tell you that money doesn't have to be the source of stress in this house. What do you mean? David asked quietly. Instead of answering with words, I flipped over the bank statement. The number at the bottom was clear, printed in black ink by the bank's computer system. Emma, who was just learning to read large numbers in school, sounded it out slowly. $1,432,618, she read carefully. Then she looked up at me with wide eyes. Grandma Maria, is this how much money you have? In this account, I said, yes. The silence that followed was different from the previous silences. This one was filled with shock, disbelief, and the sound of assumptions crumbling. David stared at the number as if it might change if he looked at it long enough. Mom, this can't be right. This has to be some kind of mistake. It's not a mistake, I said. It's 43 years of commercial real estate commissions, careful investing, and living below my means. It's what happens when you understand compound interest and you start early. It's what happens when you don't spend money on trying to impress people who don't matter. Jennifer was staring at the statement like it was written in a foreign language. But you never said, you never mentioned. When would I have mentioned it? I asked. During one of our many heart-to-heart conversations. While you were asking my opinion about family decisions. When you were inviting me to participate in planning for the children's future? Lucas, with the mathematical mind he had inherited from his father, was studying the numbers. Grandma Maria, this is more money than Mom and Dad make in like a really long time. Yes, sweetheart, I said. It is. But why didn't you tell us? Emma asked with the confusion of a child who couldn't understand why someone would keep such important information secret. Because, I said, looking directly at Jennifer, when someone decides you're worthless before they know anything about you, it doesn't matter what you're actually worth. They've already made up their minds. Jennifer finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Maria, I had no idea. If I had known. If you had known what? I asked. That I was wealthy? Would that have changed how you treated me? Would you have included me in family decisions if you had known I could afford to pay for them? Would you have been kinder to me if you had seen this bank statement 4 months ago? The questions hung in the air like accusations, because that's exactly what they were. The problem, Jennifer, I continued, isn't that you didn't know how much money I have. The problem is that you decided I was worthless as a person, And no amount of money changes that judgment. You're not sorry you treated me badly. You're sorry you treated someone badly who could have solved your money problems. David was holding his head in his hands. Mom, I'm so sorry. I had no idea Jennifer felt. I never realized we were making you feel. I know you didn't, sweetheart, I said, reaching over to touch his arm. You're not cruel, David. You're just conflict avoidant. You let Jennifer manage the household dynamics because it was easier than dealing with the complications yourself. But what do we do now, he asked, looking up at me with eyes that reminded me of the little boy he used to be when he had broken something and didn't know how to fix it. Now, I said, we decide what kind of family we want to be going forward. Because this conversation has changed everything, and we can't pretend it hasn't. I looked around the table again, at these 4 people who were seeing me clearly for perhaps the first time since I had moved into their home. And Jennifer, I added, meeting her eyes directly, you get to decide whether you want to apologize for judging someone's worth based on your own assumptions, or whether you want to apologize for not knowing they had money, because those are 2 very different apologies, and only one of them means anything. The ball was in their court now. The truth was on the table, literally and figuratively. What happened next would determine whether we could build something real together, or whether this revelation had simply made an already broken situation more complicated. The minutes that followed my ultimatum felt like the longest of my life. I watched as each family member processed what had just happened, their faces cycling through confusion, embarrassment, and something that might have been shame. The bank statement remained on the table between us like evidence in a trial, impossible to ignore or explain away. Ida Liz. Emma was the first to break the silence. With the beautiful honesty that only children possess, she looked directly at her mother and asked, Mom, why did you say Grandma Maria was worthless if you didn't even know her? That's not nice. Jennifer's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't immediately answer. I could see her struggling with something. Perhaps the realization that her 8-year-old daughter had just cut straight to the heart of the matter in a way that exposed the poverty of her own behavior. Lucas, meanwhile, was still studying the bank statement with fascination. Grandma Maria, he said, with this much money you could buy anything. You could buy a really big house, or a boat, or even help Mom and Dad so they don't have to worry about money anymore. I could, I agreed. But remember what I just said to your mother. Money doesn't change who someone is as a person. It just reveals what was already there. David finally looked up from where he had been staring at his hands. Mom, I owe you an apology. Not because of the money, he added quickly, but because I let this happen. I should have noticed. I should have stood up for you. What should you have noticed? I asked, though I already knew the answer. I wanted him to say it out loud. That we were... He struggled to find the words. That you weren't being treated like family, that you were being made to feel unwelcome in your own home. This isn't my home, David, I said gently. It's yours. But families should be welcome in each other's homes, shouldn't they? Jennifer finally spoke, her voice thick with emotion. Maria, She stopped, took a shaky breath, and tried again. I owe you an apology, a real one. Not because of your money, but because I judged you without knowing you. I decided what kind of person you were based on nothing, really. On my own assumptions and prejudices. It was a start, but I needed to hear more. What assumptions? I asked. Jennifer wiped her eyes with her napkin. I assumed that because you were older, you wouldn't understand modern parenting. I assumed that because you were recently widowed, you would be needy and demanding. I assumed that because you had to move in with us, you didn't have other options or resources. She paused, looking at the bank statement again. I assumed that because you were my husband's mother, you would try to interfere with how I ran my household. I was so busy protecting my territory that I never bothered to find out who you actually were. And who am I? I asked. I don't know, Jennifer admitted, and there was genuine pain in her voice. That's the problem. I've been living with you for 4 months, and I don't know anything real about you. I don't know about your career, or your achievements, or your interests, or your dreams. I've been so focused on keeping you at arm's length that I never gave you a chance to be anything more than my idea of what a mother-in-law should be. Emma had been listening to this conversation with the intense concentration of a child trying to understand adult complexities. "Mom," she said suddenly, "is that why you never let Grandma Maria help plan my birthday party? Because you thought she wouldn't know what I like?" Jennifer's face crumpled. "Yes, sweetheart, and that was wrong of me. Grandma Maria might have had wonderful ideas for your party, but I never gave her the chance to share them." "Can she help with my next birthday?" Emma asked hopefully. "If she wants to," Jennifer said, looking at me with uncertainty. "If she's still willing to be part of our family after how badly I've treated her." Lucas had been unusually quiet during this exchange, but now he spoke up with the directness that had started this whole conversation. "Grandma Maria, are you going to move out now? Because you could afford your own house, couldn't you?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Everyone was looking at me, waiting to see what I would do with the power that my revelation had given me. "I could afford my own house," I said slowly. "I could afford several houses, actually. But the question isn't what I can afford. The question is what I want, and what you all want." I looked around the table again. When I moved in here, I thought I was joining a family. I thought I would be a grandmother to Emma and Lucas, a mother-in-law to Jennifer, and a supportive presence for David as he built his career and raised his children. Instead, I continued, I became a ghost in your house. Someone who existed on the margins of your lives, tolerated but not welcomed, accepted but not valued. David winced at my words, but didn't interrupt. "The money changes some things," I said, "but it doesn't change the fundamental question. Do you want me here as a family member or not? Because if you want me here because I can solve your financial problems, that's not the same as wanting me here because I'm family." Jennifer was crying openly now. "I want you here because you're David's mother and the children's grandmother. I want you here because you have 40 years of life experience that I could learn from. I want you here because you make David happy in a way I never see, except when he's talking about his childhood or sharing stories about you." She paused, struggling to continue. "I want you here because Emma and Lucas deserve to know their grandmother, and because I robbed them of that relationship with my own selfishness and insecurity. And I want you here," she added, looking directly at me, "because I think you're probably an amazing woman, and I'm ashamed that I never bothered to find out." It was the most honest thing Jennifer had said since I had moved in. But words, I had learned over 7 decades of life, were easier than actions. "What does that look like practically?" I asked. "If I stay, if we try to rebuild this family dynamic, what changes?" David spoke first. "You get included in decisions. Real inclusion, not just being informed after we've already made up our minds." "Family dinners," Emma added. "Real ones, where we all eat together and talk about our day." "And you can help with my homework when I'm stuck," Lucas said. "You're really good at explaining math in ways that make sense." Jennifer took a deep breath. "It means I stop managing your relationship with the children. It means I ask your opinion about things instead of assuming I know what's best. It means I treat you like the accomplished woman you are instead of like what I was treating you like. And it means," David added, "that we have honest conversations about everything. Money, family dynamics, problems, celebrations, all of it. No more walking on eggshells, no more pretending everything is fine when it isn't." I considered their words carefully. The cynic in me, the part that had been hurt by months of exclusion and dismissal, wanted to point out that they were only saying these things now that they knew about my bank account. But the mother and grandmother in me, the part that had moved in here hoping to build deeper relationships with my family, wanted to believe that people could learn and grow and change. "There would need to be ground rules," I said finally, "clear expectations about how we treat each other, how we make decisions, how we handle conflicts when they arise." "Yes," Jennifer said immediately, "whatever you need. It's not about what I need," I corrected. "It's about what we all need to feel respected and valued in this house. Including you, Jennifer. Your needs matter too, even if I disagree with how you've expressed them." I picked up the bank statement and folded it carefully. "This money isn't going anywhere. It will still be there tomorrow and next week and next year. But trust, once it's broken, is much harder to rebuild." Are you all willing to do the work that rebuilding requires? 4 heads nodded around the table, with varying degrees of enthusiasm and understanding. Then let's start over, I said, not pretending the last 4 months didn't happen, but learning from them. And let's see if we can build something better than what we had before. Emma clapped her hands excitedly. Does this mean you're staying, Grandma Maria? It means, I said, that we're all going to try to do better. And yes, sweetheart, it means I'm staying. For the first time since I had moved in, I felt like I might actually be home. The week following our dinner table revelation felt like living in a completely different house with completely different people. Not because anyone had fundamentally changed overnight, but because the masks had finally come off, and we were all learning to navigate relationships based on truth rather than assumptions. Jennifer's transformation was the most dramatic, though I could see her struggling with it. She would catch herself mid-sentence when she started to make decisions without consulting me, then pause and actually ask my opinion. The first few times, it was awkward. She clearly wasn't used to considering someone else's perspective when it came to household matters, and I wasn't used to being asked. The first real test came when Lucas's soccer coach called to say the team was planning an end-of-season tournament that would require traveling to Raleigh for the weekend. Jennifer had started to automatically decline, citing budget constraints, when she stopped mid-conversation. "Can I call you back?" she asked the coach. Then she hung up and turned to me. "Maria, would you like to be part of this decision?" I was sitting at the kitchen table reading the newspaper, something I hadn't done in the main living areas for months. "What decision?" "Lucas's soccer tournament. It's in Raleigh next weekend. Hotel, meals, tournament fees. It would probably cost around $400 total. We were going to say no because—" She paused, clearly uncomfortable with admitting financial limitations. "Because it's not in our budget right now." "What does Lucas want?" I asked. "He really wants to go. His friends are all planning to be there, and he's been working hard all season." I set down my newspaper. "Then let's figure out how to make it happen." Jennifer looked uncertain. "I don't want you to feel like you have to pay for everything just because you can afford to." It was a fair concern, and one we needed to address head-on. "You're right to worry about that," I said. "We need to figure out how financial decisions work in this family going forward. But for this specific situation, I have a suggestion." I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. "I'm going to transfer $5,000 into your family checking account. Not as a loan, not as payment for my room and board, but as my contribution to the family budget. We can use it for things like Lucas's tournament, Emma's art supplies, David's business expenses, or whatever comes up." Jennifer stared at me. "Maria, that's incredibly generous, but nothing," I said firmly. "I've been living here for months, eating your food, using your utilities, taking up space in your home. In any reasonable arrangement, I would have been contributing to household expenses from the beginning. The fact that you were too proud to ask and I was too hurt to offer doesn't change that basic reality." I tapped my phone screen a few times, completing the transfer. "There. It's done. Now call the coach back and tell him Lucas will be there." Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. "Maria, I don't know how to thank you." "You don't thank family for being family," I said. "You just love them and show up when they need you." That afternoon, when Lucas came home from school and learned he could go to the tournament, his reaction was pure joy. He hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe, and he kept saying, "Thank you, Grandma Maria," over and over again. But what touched me most was when he pulled back and said, "I'm going to score a goal for you." "You don't have to score a goal for me, sweetheart," I told him. "Just play your best and have fun." "But I want to," he insisted. "You made it so I could go, so if I score, it's for you." That evening, Jennifer knocked on my bedroom door. I was reading, something I had started doing in the main living areas again, but had retreated to my room for privacy. "Can we talk?" she asked. "Of course." She sat down in the small chair by my window, looking nervous. "I wanted to discuss something with you, and I'm not sure how to bring it up." "Just say it directly," I suggested. "We're past the point of dancing around difficult topics." David and I have been talking about the money situation. Not just the $5,000 you transferred today, but everything. Your resources, our struggles, how we move forward. She paused, gathering her thoughts. We don't want to take advantage of your generosity, but we also don't want to let pride stop us from accepting help that could benefit the whole family. What specifically are you thinking about? I asked. Well, David has been wanting to start his own marketing consultancy for years, but we could never afford for him to take the financial risk of leaving his steady job. With your support, he could actually pursue that dream. I set down my book. This was exactly the kind of conversation I had hoped we might have months ago. Tell me more about his business idea. For the next hour, Jennifer outlined David's plan in detail. He had identified a niche in helping small North Carolina businesses develop digital marketing strategies. He had already done freelance work for several potential clients. He had researched the market, developed a business plan, and calculated startup costs. The main barrier has been that he would need to go at least 6 months without his full salary while building the client base, Jennifer explained. We've been living paycheck to paycheck, so there was no way to take that risk. How much would he need to cover expenses during the startup period, I asked. About $60,000, enough to cover his lost salary plus business setup costs, marketing, office space, basic equipment. I considered this carefully. David was talented, hardworking, and had a good understanding of the local business environment. More importantly, this was his dream, not something being imposed on him by others. I think that's a wonderful idea, I said. But I want to structure it properly. Not as a gift, but as an investment. I'll provide the startup capital in exchange for a small equity stake in the business. That way, if David succeeds, we all benefit. If he struggles, we're partners in figuring out solutions. Jennifer looked stunned. You would do that? Jennifer, David is my son. I want him to be happy and fulfilled in his work. If I can help make that possible, why wouldn't I? She was quiet for a moment, then said something that surprised me. You know, watching you handle all of this, the money conversations, the business planning, the way you think about investments and partnerships, I'm realizing I had no idea how accomplished you really are. What do you mean? I mean, I've been treating you like someone who didn't understand the modern world. But you understand business and finance better than David and I do combined. You've been successful in ways I never bothered to find out about. I appreciated her honesty. I spent 43 years negotiating complex commercial real estate deals, Jennifer. I've structured partnerships, analyzed market trends, evaluated investment opportunities, and managed financial risk. Those skills don't disappear when you retire. I know that now, she said quietly. I'm sorry it took me so long to see it. We can't change the past, I said, but we can learn from it. The next morning, David and I sat down to discuss his business plan in detail. As we talked, I could see his excitement building. This wasn't just about financial freedom. It was about professional fulfillment, creative control, and the chance to build something of his own. Mom, he said finally, are you sure about this? It's a lot of money, and there's always risk involved in starting a business. David, when I was your age, I took my last $400 and rented a storage room above a diner to start my real estate business. It was terrifying, but it was also the best decision I ever made. I paused, remembering those early days. The difference is, you don't have to risk everything like I did. You have family support, business experience, and a financial cushion. That doesn't guarantee success, but it gives you the freedom to focus on building something great instead of just surviving. What if I fail? Then we figure out what went wrong and decide whether to try again or move in a different direction. But David, not trying is a guaranteed failure. Taking the risk at least gives you a chance at success. That evening, we had our first real family dinner since the night of our revelation. Everyone was present. Everyone participated in the conversation, and for the first time in months, I felt like I belonged at the table. As we were clearing dishes, Emma looked up at me and said, "Grandma Maria, I'm glad you're not going to move out." "Why?" I asked. "Because you make Dad smile more. And you help with my math homework. And you know how to make really good rice." Lucas nodded in agreement. "And because now our family feels bigger. More complete." Jennifer, who was listening to this conversation, added quietly, "And because we're all better when we're honest with each other." I looked around at these 4 people who were slowly becoming my family in ways that went beyond just blood relation and shared living space. We had a long way to go. Trust building is a gradual process, and old habits die hard. But for the first time since I had moved in, I felt hopeful about our future together. "I'm glad I'm staying too," I said. "All of us together are stronger than any of us alone." And I meant it. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of what had finally become my home, preparing arroz con pollo for a celebration dinner that felt fundamentally different from that painful evening when everything had changed. The same recipe, the same kitchen, but everything else had been transformed. David's marketing consultancy had not only launched successfully, it was thriving beyond any of our initial projections. 3 months in, he had already secured enough clients to replace his former salary, and by month 5, he was earning more than he had at his corporate job. The equity stake I held in his business was performing better than most of my traditional investments, but more importantly, I got to watch my son wake up excited about work every single day. "Grandma Maria, can you help me with this poster?" Emma called from the dining room, where she was working on a school project about family heritage. Over the past months, she had become genuinely interested in learning about my childhood in Puerto Rico, my journey to North Carolina, and the early days of building my real estate business. "Of course, sweetheart," I replied, wiping my hands on a dish towel. "What do you need help with?" I walked into the dining room to find Emma surrounded by photos, many of which I had retrieved from storage boxes that had been sitting untouched since I moved in. There were pictures of me receiving awards from the North Carolina Association of Realtors, photos from commercial property groundbreaking ceremonies I had facilitated, and images from various community events where I had been recognized for my professional achievements. "I want to write about how you started your business with only $400 and built it into something really successful," Emma said, "but I need help explaining what commercial real estate means." I sat down beside her, marveling at how much had changed. 6 months ago, Jennifer would have managed Emma's homework without consulting me. Now, Emma came to me directly when she needed help, and Jennifer encouraged these interactions. "Commercial real estate," I began, "is when you help businesses find places to work, instead of helping families find places to live." As I explained the basics of my former career, I watched Emma's face light up with understanding and pride. It struck me that this was the first time since moving in that anyone in the family had shown genuine interest in my professional accomplishments, not because of the money they had generated, but because of the work itself. "Were you famous?" Emma asked. "Not famous like a movie star," I said, "but I was well known in my field. Other real estate agents would ask my advice about complicated deals. Developers would call me when they needed someone who understood the market really well." "That's so cool," Emma said, carefully gluing a photo of me standing in front of a major office complex I had helped lease. "I want to be a businesswoman like you when I grow up." The words hit me unexpectedly hard, not just because of Emma's admiration, but because of what they represented. For the first time, someone in this family saw my career as something to aspire to, not just something to benefit from financially. Jennifer appeared in the doorway, carrying a cup of coffee and wearing the relaxed expression that had become her new normal since David's business had eliminated their financial stress. "How's the family heritage project coming?" she asked, settling into a chair across from us. "Grandma Maria was just telling me about being a business expert," Emma said proudly. "She still is a business expert," Jennifer said, looking at me with what I had learned to recognize as genuine respect. "She's been invaluable in helping Dad structure his company properly." This was true. Over the past months, David had consulted with me regularly about client contracts, pricing strategies, and business development opportunities. My decades of experience in commercial transactions had proven surprisingly relevant to his marketing consultancy, and I found myself enjoying the role of advisor and mentor. "Speaking of business," Jennifer continued, "Maria, I wanted to talk to you about something." "What's that?" "I've been thinking about expanding my graphic design work. Several of David's clients have asked if I do branding and web design, which I do, but I've always worked as a freelancer. I'm wondering if it might make sense to formalize it into an actual business." This was progress I hadn't expected. 6 months ago, Jennifer had been reluctant to accept any financial help. Now she was proactively seeking business advice and considering growth strategies. What would formalizing it look like? I asked. Incorporating as an LLC, getting business insurance, maybe renting a small office space that I could share with David. Creating a real brand identity instead of just taking projects as they come. I set down the photo Emma had been working with and gave Jennifer my full attention. Those are all good ideas, but let's start with the fundamentals. What's your current revenue, and what are your growth projections? For the next hour, we discussed Jennifer's business prospects with the same seriousness I had brought to David's venture. She had been more successful as a freelancer than I had realized, and her skills complemented David's services in ways that could benefit both their businesses. I think you should do it, I concluded, and I'd like to offer the same kind of investment partnership I have with David if you're interested. Jennifer looked surprised. Maria, you've already done so much for our family. I don't want to take advantage. You're not taking advantage, I interrupted. This is how family businesses work. We invest in each other's success because when one of us does well, we all benefit. That evening, as we sat around the dinner table eating my arroz con pollo, I reflected on how dramatically our family dynamic had evolved. The conversation flowed naturally between topics: Lucas's upcoming soccer playoffs, Emma's school presentation, David's latest client success, Jennifer's business plans, and my own activities with the local Chamber of Commerce, where I had recently joined the Small Business Mentoring Committee. Grandma Maria, Lucas said suddenly, remember when you first moved in and you said you might help with my math homework? I remember. Well, now you help with everything. My homework. Mom's business, Dad's business, Emma's projects. You're like the family problem solver. We're all family problem solvers, I corrected gently. We help each other. But you're really good at it, Lucas insisted. Like, professional good at it. David laughed. That's because your grandmother spent 40 years being professional good at solving problems. And now she uses those skills to help us, Jennifer added, which makes all of us stronger. I looked around the table at these 4 people who had become my family in the truest sense of the word, not because we shared a house or because I had helped solve their financial problems, but because we had learned to see each other clearly and value what each person brought to our collective life. You know, I said, when I first moved in here, I thought I was looking for a place to belong after losing your grandfather Richard. I thought I needed a family to take care of me. I paused, choosing my words carefully. But what I've learned is that family isn't about one person taking care of another. It's about everyone taking care of everyone else in whatever ways they can. Emma nodded seriously. Like how you help with money stuff, and Mom helps with creative stuff, and Dad helps with business stuff, and Lucas and I help with kids stuff. Exactly, I said. We all contribute different things, and together we're stronger than any of us would be alone. Jennifer reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Maria, I need to say something, and I hope you'll let me get through it without interrupting. I nodded. When I called you completely worthless, I was really talking about my own insecurities. I was afraid that you would be better at being a mother and grandmother than I was, so I convinced myself that you had nothing valuable to offer. I was protecting myself by diminishing you. She paused, her voice growing stronger. But the truth is, you've made me a better mother, a better wife, and a better person. Not because of your money, but because of your wisdom, your patience, and your example of how to treat people with respect, even when they don't deserve it. And, she continued, I want Emma and Lucas to grow up knowing that their grandmother is an accomplished businesswoman, a generous family member, and someone who survived difficult times by being strong and smart and kind. I want them to be proud of you because I'm proud to be your daughter-in-law. The silence that followed was filled with warmth rather than tension. Emma broke it by saying, Can we put that in my family heritage project? About how Grandma Maria taught Mom to be a better mom? Everyone laughed, including Jennifer. I think that's exactly the kind of thing that should go in a family heritage project, she said. Later that night, as I was getting ready for bed, I looked around my room, which no longer felt like a temporary guest space, but like my own bedroom in my own home. On my nightstand was a framed photo from Lucas's soccer tournament, the one where he had indeed scored a goal and dedicated it to me. Beside it was a drawing Emma had made of our family, where I was prominently featured and labeled Grandma Maria the business expert. I thought about that dinner conversation months ago when Jennifer had called me completely worthless, and about the bank statement that had shocked everyone into seeing me differently. But I realize now that the bank statement hadn't been the real revelation. The real revelation had been everything that came after: the honest conversations, the mutual respect, the genuine partnership we had built together. My worth had never been measured in dollars. It had always been measured in the relationships I built, the problems I solved, the people I mentored, and the love I gave and received. The money had just been the catalyst that forced everyone to recognize what had been there all along. I turned off the light and settled into bed, listening to the familiar sounds of my family's house settling around me. Tomorrow, David would ask my advice about a new client proposal. Jennifer would want to discuss marketing strategies for her business launch. Emma would need help with a math problem. Lucas would want to practice soccer in the backyard and ask me to keep score. I was exactly where I belonged, not because I had proven my worth through financial revelation, but because I had claimed my place through patience, wisdom, and love. And that, I thought as I drifted off to sleep, was worth more than any bank account could ever measure. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.